Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. As you may have guessed it from the title of this video, we will be talking about BPD in relationship to anxiety. Now I know that there's probably a good chunk of you out there who suffer from comorbid anxiety in relation to your BPD. So today I just wanted to take the time to talk about anxiety, BPD, the differences, how anxiety manifests itself in those who have BPD, how it looks different from folks who don't have borderline personality disorder, and how we can help with those things. Okay, so before talking about anxiety, quick reminder about what borderline personality disorder is. It is a personality disorder, as the name says it, which has 9 main symptoms. Okay, so generally speaking, we see things like dysregulated moods and emotions, a fear of abandonment, feelings of emptiness, suicidal ideation, self-harm. You have things like dissociation, intense anger or rage, and the way that BPD presents itself in different individuals looks very different, okay? It's a spectrum, meaning that not everyone will experience the symptoms in the same way. We have maybe people with BPD traits, but not necessarily a full-blown personality disorder. And so it's just important to keep in mind that if this is the first time that you're learning about this, to not overgeneralize the disorder and to assume that the stories that we hear or that we read on the internet are representative of every single person who does have BPD. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, we have a better sense of what BPD actually is. Let's talk about anxiety in relation to BPD. Now, over half of those, so you all out there who have BPD, also have a comorbid anxiety diagnosis, okay? That's actually a really significant number. It's not something small. It's over half of the people who have BPD that also suffer from anxiety, which begs the question, why is there so many of us who have this other disorder relating to BPD? While there's no really clear answers out there, I think that once we understand the symptoms, namely what I had just said, so the dysregulated emotions with the fear of abandonment, this can give us really good insight as to why maybe those who do have BPD also suffer from anxiety. Okay, so when thinking about dysregulated emotions, I think that with this, it means that those who have BPD probably experience stress, feeling overwhelmed, with a lot more intensity, meaning that they could have a tendency to overthink, to feel overwhelmed, to ruminate on past or future events and really be stuck in their heads. Okay, so to me, it's no surprise that if you have someone who is more sensitive, who also has difficulty regulating their emotions, that would kind of go hand in hand with an anxiety disorder. Something else that might play into this, so firstly, we have the difficulty with regulating emotions, which means that at times perhaps stress, anxiety, overwhelm is felt with more intensity. But then we also have another key factor, symptom of BPD is interpersonal difficulties. Okay, so we know that paired with this emotion dysregulation, paired also with the fear of abandonment, that those with BPD tend to have difficulty maintaining interpersonal relationships, whether that's a friendship, a professional relationship, family relationships, romantic relationships. There tends to be more conflicts within those realms than maybe those who don't suffer from BPD. Okay, so if you are someone that has BPD and you have this tendency to have difficulty with interpersonal relationship, again, the anxiety piece would make sense. If relating to other people, getting close to them, being dependent, because you have this fear of abandonment, would make sense then that it creates anxiety for you. To rely on others, to ask for help, to feel like you can show up as yourself without being left or abandoned. It also means that if you have constant turmoil in your relationships, that naturally speaking, you would have anxiety when around those people or in those situations, because it's this environment that is always triggering or that's always making you feel overwhelmed or stressed. And the third thing really that I could see as being a contributing factor that leads to comorbid anxiety disorders would really be this history of neglect and abuse. We know that those who have BPD on average tend to have some sort of history of being abused or neglected as children. Okay, this can look like, again, a range of things. It can look like getting abandoned by one of your parents. It can look like your parents, while loving you and being supportive and having a stable family situation or life at home, that they were not attuned to your sensitivity, meaning that maybe they ignored you or invalidated you. So it can really look like different things for different people. There's no, oh, you need to have been physically or sexually abused to get BPD. No, it can look like what we call small t trauma, meaning not getting your needs met in the way that we needed at that time. Okay, so with this history of abuse, usually what happens with this is that attachment styles will be created in a way that they are insecure. Okay, so for a lot of you out there, if you do have BPD, you can probably relate to having what we call this disorganized attachment style, meaning that you fluctuate or alter between being really anxious and being avoidant. Okay, so this classic, I hate you, which is the avoidant piece. I love you, don't leave me, which is the anxious piece. And so if you have a history of being abused or neglected, developmentally speaking, normal that you develop a more anxious or avoidant attachment style. And if you have an anxious attachment style, it means that you will be more anxious as a person because there's a constant threat of being left or abandoned. Okay, so now I feel like we have a pretty good understanding as to how and why anxiety shows up or tends to show up more in those who do have BPD. One of the things I also want to point out is how it differs from maybe those who don't suffer from BPD. One of the main things, or the main thing that I will state, is that I think one of these underlying factors that really drives this anxiety piece is the fear of abandonment, which we don't necessarily see in maybe someone who doesn't have BPD, and they might experience anxiety in a different way. And so if you have BPD, you might experience anxiety relating to being left. So when people are making plans without you, or you're thinking about needing to go somewhere and you're going to be late, and that gives you a lot of anxiety because maybe you're scared that I'm going to make a bad impression and I'm going to get fired and my friends are going to leave me. So there might be this underlying mechanism that perhaps is not there for other people. Not to say that you don't experience anxiety in the same way, because I know, personally speaking, I ruminate a lot and I worry about time management and all those things that maybe other people that I know who don't have BPD also experience anxiety in similar ways. Just know that there might also be this additional underlying mechanism that's really fueling your anxiety. Okay, so now that we understand anxiety, BPD, what the relationship is between the two of them, let's talk about tangible tools and things to help. One of the things that I will recommend is what we call cognitive diffusion. This is an acceptance and commitment therapy strategy, so something that I use with my own clients. And it's essentially a tool that allows us to create space between thoughts, sensations, and feelings. What tends to happen is that we have a thought, or we have a sensation, or a feeling, and we look at those things and we think, this is important, this means something, this is true. And then what happens is that we get attached, right? We fuse to the thought, and then we act in accordance to this belief. So for example, if I have the thought, I'm going to be late if I don't leave right now, and I'm going to get fired, which is my anxiety speaking. And if I look at this thing and think this is true, it's going to happen, it's important, it's meaningful, then I will get lost. And this is where the snowball effect of more anxiety, being irritable, yelling at people, whatever that looks like. Okay, so cognitive diffusion tools to practice this in a more concrete way would be to say things like, rather than I'm going to be late and get fired, stating it as if it's a fact, to repeat that to yourself and say, I'm having the thought that blank, right? I'm having the thought that I'm going to be late and get fired. Just that, it's a simple trick that you would be surprised at how much that helps to create space between the thought, the feeling, or the sensation. And when we can create more space, we have more room to act in a way that's effective and not to get swept away by the current. A really great book that explains this concept is called The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. It's a short book that talks about a lot of this acceptance and commitment therapy concepts. So cognitive diffusion, what getting fused to thoughts looks like, how to practice acceptance, how to discover your values and act in a way that's in accordance to those things. So that would be really the first thing that I would recommend. Second thing, just going back to the basics, making sure that you're taking care of your physical health, getting 8 hours of sleep a night, drinking enough water, eating meals regularly when you're hungry, and making sure that you're fueling your body with food that feels energizing, that you're not under feeding yourself, because then you're going to be more irritable, more prone to anxiety and letting yourself getting swept away. So making sure that you're eating, making sure that you're moving your body, making sure that you're getting enough social time. I know for anxiety, when we're stuck alone with our thoughts, that's oftentimes when it tends to get worse. And so if you can focus on building social connections and really integrating yourself in a community of people who are like-minded, who share same values, that's a great place to start. So really just focusing on going back to the basics to help mitigate and manage those vulnerabilities that make you more susceptible to being more anxious and to getting swept away in that current. Lastly, you can practice tools, so things like mindfulness, self-compassion. As always, I really recommend and advocate for therapy, not just because I am a therapist, but because I think it's amazing. And the good thing with therapy is that you have someone who's really there for you, who helps to give you customized tools based on the things that you were experiencing in that moment. So that's it for today's video. Leave me a comment down below to let me know what the tools and tricks that you use for your anxiety. I'm also curious to know how your anxiety shows up in maybe a way that's different because you do have BPD. On that note, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today. I wish you all the best week, and I will see you next time for another episode of On the Line.